This is a president like no other. The president is often a big story, but Trump is the biggest story, not just in the country, but in the entire world.
He busts a lot of norms. He does things his own way. He speaks in a much more direct and unfiltered fashion that we're not used to seeing.
You have to be prepared to be surprised all the time. You have to be prepared to be shocked all the time. And that's just part of the job. It's part of being a White House correspondent in 2020.
You are the enemy of the people.
Covering President Trump is the story of a lifetime for many reporters. Intense, relentless, chaotic, historic. And what you write is bound to upset someone, including the president.
Especially, sir, you're the president, and people tuning into these briefings, they want to get information and guidance and want to know what to do. They're not looking for rumors.
I'm the president, and you're fake news.
Philip Rucker is the Washington Post's White House bureau chief and helps lead the team of 7 White House reporters.
So we're in a James Brady press briefing room. This is the lectern that the press secretary uses, Kayleigh McEnany, to do her briefing. Sometimes we see the president out here too. This is where the action happens. We see it on television when there are briefings that take place, but it's such a smaller and more intimate room than anybody at home can imagine.
First time I was ever in here, I was surprised by how small it is. And I mean, it's a working room. There's camera gear everywhere. It doesn't have this glamorous feel that you get when you're just seeing it well lit on TV.
There is no glamour about this room. In fact, it's often a mess because these are tight quarters.
So this is where you would normally sit at a briefing?
That's right. This is the seat that's assigned to the Washington Post. And so for years now, this is where Post correspondents have sat during the briefing. It's in the second row. The first row is usually the television networks and the wire services, and then the major newspapers are here in the second row.
So during this time of coronavirus, if you were in the briefing, where would you be?
Because they want everybody spaced out. For social distancing purposes, there's a rotation, but it's a very different atmosphere. I mean, when this room is packed, there's an energy and an electricity in the room and hands flying in the air and a lot of questions. So throughout the press briefing room, there are cameras everywhere. So you know you're always being monitored. There are actually little microphones that hang down from the ceiling to record the audio of reporters. And then back here, you see camera equipment for each of the 5 TV networks. And that's how they can broadcast the briefings live. And right behind you, Libby, are another set of camera positions so that the cameras can capture the reporters in the seats.
What does it mean to be so close to the front? This is a very prominent position. You're easy for the press secretary or the president to see.
You know, it makes it easier for whoever's leading the briefing to be able to notice your question and your hand raised and to call on you.
It also means, though, that you're often on camera.
Yeah, and it's something we're really mindful of when we come to these briefings, because we know that any reaction we have to something that the press secretary says or that the president says could end up on camera, could end up becoming a meme on social media. And we, of course, don't want to be the story ourselves.
White House reporter Ashley Parker knows that all too well.
We are all bit players who can potentially make cameos in the Trump show. And what happened was Sean Spicer was giving an answer that sort of defied credulity. I kind of raised my eyebrows in some confusion and skepticism, and that happened to get captured.
He was not using the gas on his own people the same way that a shot is doing. I mean, there was clearly, I understand your point. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. There was not... he brought him into the Holocaust Center. I understand that.
It seemed as if my eyebrows reflected the collective sentiment of a nation in that moment.
What do you do when the president of the United States criticizes one of your stories or criticizes you personally or says your story is wrong?
First, it was an incredibly jarring feeling because the president of the United States is the president of the United States. And if they say your story is incorrect or you got something wrong, it does sort of make you pause and go back and say, well, did I miss something, right? But what we've learned is often when the president goes after a story, what it turns out to mean is that the story is right, that he doesn't like it. It's a story that's really gotten under his skin. And oftentimes after sending a tweet 2 or 3 days later, he will inadvertently confirm the story.
Is it tempting to fight back or, defend yourself?
I think when you are engaging in a conversation about yourself, especially with this White House, you're losing. I feel like the best way to defend ourselves is to do top-notch, bulletproof reporting. That is sort of, it's a pre-defense in a way. But, the media is probably like the only group that has a lower approval rating than Congress. And the president has very savvily set the media up as an opposition party.
Like, my human instinct is to fight back, like to defend my honor and to defend myself and to snap back at him. That's what I want to do. And I just use every muscle I have to try to restrain that impulse, because it's not my job to react to him. It's not my job to put on a show where he has conflict with the reporter. It's my job to get him to answer questions, and it's my job to hold him accountable.
Is there extra pressure on reporters of color who are not just in front of the President of the United States, but also in front of the eyes of the nation with those TV cameras on you?
I think so. I think the president looks for areas that he can attack, and he's made direct attacks and he's made direct references to the backgrounds of specific reporters, where they've come from, who their friends are, saying that they were very close to President Obama when there's no evidence to show that. He's been blatant about his willingness to attack on racial lines, and I do think it increases the pressure and it makes it harder, but thankfully there are a lot of reporters of color who have risen to the occasion, who have risen to the task, and who have done yeoman's work of just holding this president to account.
You want him to rein in Robert Mueller?
What a stupid question that is. What a stupid question. But I watch you a lot. You ask a lot of stupid questions.
Some people saw that as emboldening white nationalists. Now people are also saying
I don't know why you'd
that
say
the
that.
president.
That's such a racist question.
You are untruthful.
Are you going to include the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional
Well, I
Hispanic
would.
Caucus?
I tell you what. Do you want to set up the meeting? Do you want to set up the meeting?
No.
Are they friends of
I'm
yours?
Just a reporter.
No, set up the meeting.
I know some.
Would you acknowledge that you didn't think
Keep your voice down, please. Keep your voice down.
So we were in the briefing room, and I know a lot happens in there, but that's what we see. What happens behind the scenes for a White House reporter?
People sometimes have a perception that as a White House reporter, all you do is sit in those blue chairs and raise your hand and ask questions. But there's so much more to it than that. It requires a lot of source building and conversations with individuals who have expertise that we're trying to learn from. The job also requires developing sources inside this building at the White House and also throughout the federal government, and all those friends that the president talks to late at night from the phone right up there in the residence. We want them talking to us and telling us what's really happening behind the scenes, and that takes a lot of work.
Tolu, why do sources talk to you?
Well, there are a lot of different reasons. Sources want to be able to get their version of the story out there. A lot of times they know that their colleagues or sometimes their competitors are speaking to reporters, and if the sources don't talk to us and someone else is setting the narrative, some sources do care about history and they want to make sure that for the historical record that the version of events of what happened is out there. And some people are, to be honest, quite vain. So some sources have their own self-interest in mind.
Is it easier to develop sources in this White House?
Well, in some ways it is easier because there are more people who talk, there are more people who leak, there are more people who are not part of the specific chain of command who will say things out of turn. But it's harder to know sort of who is actually in the room, who actually has the information, who is the last person to speak to the president. Because in some cases, the president may take one position and then 30 minutes later or the next day, he may take a different position after talking to someone else.
So you could write with authority, sources say the president plans to X, and only to find out they were telling you the truth, but a half an hour later, President Trump may have changed his mind and told another set of advisors something totally different.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is a president who is very hard to pin down on policy, doesn't have a lot of specific ideological positions, and shifts from position to position from moment to moment, depending on the last person he spoke to.
People used to think like, oh, it must be the easiest job in the world because you just have people calling you to leak nonstop. And that's actually not the case. Oftentimes it was us making 40 or 50 phone calls and hearing back from 9 or 10 people and understanding. And the reason, again, we also talk to so many people and sometimes there's so many reporters on a story is to really get a 360 view of what happened.
Why would sources talk to you?
In the early days of the Trump administration, there were all of these different warring factions. They were playing their war out in the media. And I would ask them this. I would say, you work in the White House. You can walk into the Oval Office and make your case directly to the president. Why don't you do that? And they would say, yeah, we can. But you know what's more effective? If the president reads something in the front page of the Washington Post, if the president sees something on Fox News or on Morning Joe. So they sort of realized that they could more effectively make a case to the president through the media than even an in-person meeting in front of the Resolute desk sometimes. So you had a lot of people who were kind of trying to get their perspective out through the media, which on the one hand was great, but on the other hand is challenging because we're not meant to be tools of a certain faction of the administration.
So how unique is this president from a journalist perspective?
The pace and the urgency and the relentlessness that we find that in this administration is just like no other.
Normally in a previous administration, you would expect the president's message to be well honed and organized and strategized by multiple people, multiple teams of people. In this case, it's really just one man.
The demands on the reporters covering the White House now are much greater, but it's also such a more exhilarating and challenging story to cover because we don't really know what's going to happen the next day.
Do you have to chase down every crazy thing and rumor that you hear?
We do chase down a ton of stuff that on its face sounds outlandish. And part of the reason is because we've learned in this administration that thing that seems improbable, that the president is trying to buy Greenland, turns out to be true. So I think we've learned, not that everything we hear that we report and put in the paper, but just about everything we hear.
You have to ask, you have to chase it.
Exactly.
33% of the people in this country believe the fake news is, in fact, and I hate to say this, in fact, the enemy of the people.
To use the words of the president, are you the enemy of the people?
We are not the enemy of the people. We are allies of the American people. We do not make decisions for people. We don't vote for people. We don't tell people how to live their lives, but we want to make sure they have all the information they need. And sometimes administrations don't like all that information being out there because it puts them in a negative light.
Our democracy relies on journalists, good journalists with integrity, coming here and honestly and fairly doing their jobs.
As our executive editor Marty Barron says, we're at work, we're not at war, and our job as reporters is to hold institutions and the president accountable. And right now, the president happens to be Donald Trump. If Trump wins, we will hold him accountable for 4 more years and report on him fairly and accurately as possible. And if Joe Biden wins, I think the same people who love our coverage of Trump will not be as pleased with our coverage of Joe Biden because we are going to hold him just as accountable as we hold this president right now. Now, he may do different things, right? The stories may look different, but we will continue to fact check. We will continue to say you promised X and this hasn't happened. This thing happened and it doesn't smell right. And so no, we're not the enemy of the people or the enemy of this administration or any other administration.
What do people want to know about your beat? What do they want to know about President Trump when they find out, ooh, you're a White House reporter for the Washington Post?
The main thing they want to know is he going to win again? People want to know what's going to happen in November.